You're listening to the Jam Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is director Jim Spruell. And we're going to be talking about his award winning documentary entitled Wolf's Message. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Jan.
Nice to have you here. This film had a premiere at the Illuminate Film Festival, and it won the Director's Choice Award at the Illuminate Film Festival. That was incredibly exciting, I'm sure, and totally unexpected. How did you feel when you won the Director's Choice Award?
Well, it's funny, we had an agenda that said that there may be a surprise presentation after the screening of Wolf's Message, but nobody thought anything about it. It could have been for any film in the whole festival. So we had done the screening and we were all backstage, all of us being Suzanne Giesemann, myself, and then Mike Pasakarnis, Wolf's dad. And then the director of the whole festival was out there talking, and I started realizing she was actually talking about Wolf's Message. And then when it dawned on me, I was in such shock. I was just like, oh my God, that's us. That's us. And then Suzanne and Mike kind of shoved me out on stage to go pick it up for everybody. And it was unexpected and just a major thrill. We were thrilled.
Yes, yeah. Well, I interviewed Suzanne a few months ago about Wolf's Message, and that was prior to going to the Illuminate Film Festival. And in that interview, she spoke about how excited she was to be in this film festival with this film. So it was just wonderful having you all there. And I also had the pleasure of interviewing you on our green carpet at the film festival. So we got to know each other then. And I said, I'd love to have you on the show to talk about your perspective of Wolf's Message. And just so our listeners can get reacquainted to what Wolf's Message is about, why don't you give us a brief synopsis, Jim?
Well, Wolf's Message is based on the book Wolf's Message by Suzanne Giesemann, and it really centers around the life and passing and afterlife of Wolf Pasakarnis. He's actually Mike Wolf Pasakarnis, and he's a junior to Mike Pasakarnis Sr. And he, in essence, he predicted where, when, and how he was going to pass, what would happen immediately after he passed. And he was such a powerful spirit that he just kind of bombarded Suzanne before she did a screening for Mike and Beth, who is Wolf's stepmom, and just hit her with, I don't know, I think 45 or 46 pieces of evidence that showed that it was really him talking to her. This is really what has happened. This is where I am from, and this is what I'm sent back here to do, which was to get everybody back in balance, living from the heart more than the head. Yeah. That's a quickie synopsis, and I hope Suzanne
synopsis.
Kill me, right?
Yeah, no. I watched Wolf's Message, as I said, a few months ago before I interviewed Suzanne. And then I watched it again last night. I didn't get to really see it at the film festival because I was doing interviews during the time that the screening took place. But it was it still moves me so much. I still cried and I still was going, wow, wow, wow. It's because it's such an incredible story. And, it just says there's no coincidences on earth. There's nothing that's a coincidence. So I want to hear the story that how you and Suzanne connected, because she had been offered, after she wrote the book, Hollywood came knocking at the door and wanted to film the story, to make a movie out of this story. And but they wanted her to give up her rights to this, and she would have no say in how it was filmed. And they wanted to make it, with a protagonist and just create something that really wasn't the story. So good for her that she held out and said, no, that's not the story I want to do. And I'm sure they waved a lot of money at her, and that she held firm of what she believed this film could be. And she always knew it was going to be a film. She always knew that. So let's hear the story, because you've been in the film industry and in this industry for a long time. But I think the story about how you two connected, again, no accidents in life. So can you share that story?
I can, and I've heard Suzanne give this story several times, so I'll do my best. But
You know
and
what? I didn't ask her that question
oh, good,
in our interview.
good.
So this is the first time that our listeners are going to hear this story. So you can
Okay,
tell it as long and embellish it as much as you want.
then I'll give you the viewpoint from my side.
Okay.
Um, uh, our son passed away in November of 2021, and at that time, my wife started reading every NDE book she could find. You know, everything from like Eben Alexander's books and
Near death experience when you say in.
correct,
Okay. So
very
people
good.
understand that. Okay.
Near-death experience, NDE books. And so we live out in the sticks, kind of end of a dirt road, got horses and all that cool stuff. But so we have to order everything out of Amazon. And so one day my wife, and she was a voracious, still is a voracious reader when it comes to that type of book. And she went to her Amazon account and looked in the cart, and there was a book in the cart. And she hadn't put it in there. I hadn't put it in there. Nobody had put it in there. And she looked at it, and it was a book called Still Right Here by Suzanne Giesemann. We had never heard of Suzanne. We'd never heard of the book. And so my wife goes to, and it wasn't like, since you read this, you will love this. It was in her cart, just sitting there like she'd already slapped it in there. And so she reads the description and she's like, oh my God, this is a book I need to read. This is perfect because it's, your listeners should read the book. It's amazing, called Still Right Here by Suzanne Giesemann. And so she orders it. And when it shows up at our house, she's like a kid at Christmas. She opens up the Amazon, the package, and she pulls it out and she's like looking through. And I was sitting across from her. I hear her go, what the hell? And I see her turn a page. She goes, what the hell? I said, what's wrong? She goes, look at this. I walk over there. The first 126 or 128 pages of the book were printed upside down and backwards. And in the back of the book was printed normally, sort of a yin and yang, if you will, you know.
Wow.
And so she, you know, I'm a fixer, and my wife was upset, so therefore I was upset. So I just opened up my laptop, and I looked for Suzanne Giesemann. I found a Suzanne Giesemann, .com, and so I email, and it was not. Suzanne does a very funny presentation of my email because it was not a nice email. No F bombs or anything, but it was not a nice email. And, I was like, don't you guys have production people to look over these press proofs? Blah, 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 blah. Not very nice. So anyway, within 2 minutes, we heard back from Bev, who is Suzanne's dear friend and also like her right-hand person. And she said, we are so sorry. There have been hundreds of thousands of these books printed up. This has never happened before. We'll get you a book. Don't worry about it. So sorry. So sorry. Then we heard from Lynette, who at the time was, I think, her scheduler and all that. Same deal. Like, so sorry. All these books have been printed. Can't imagine how this happened. And then about 4 or 5 minutes later, actually got a note from Suzanne. Well, by then, Gloria and I had been talking, my wife Gloria, have been talking about, Dakota has pulled so many pranks since he's passed. You think he did this? Maybe he did this. And so we were actually having that conversation. Then we get an email from Suzanne, who was, as always, traveling. And she said, I've learned in decades of doing readings with people on the other side of the veil, they love to carry their personality with them to the other side. Let me ask you something. Was he a prankster? Dakota was a prankster. And we were like, yeah, okay. And then she said, did he have a weird sense of humor? And he certainly did. He kept us up on all sort of cutting edge comedy stuff. And then third, did he see the world differently from everybody else? And he certainly did. And so she said, I don't know how he did it. I have no idea how he did it, but I think that was Dakota just trying to get your attention and tell you still hanging out. So it was pretty amazing. And she said, and I want to give you guys a reading.
Oh,
So that's how we initially met. And then I'll say this as a little side note. My wife actually read that book. Lynette brought us. Turned out Lynette lives 15 minutes from us, and so
oh,
she actually
really?
quietly put it on our doorstep. But my wife read it with the 128 pages upside down and backwards. She read that version of the book. And her theory was, if he went to this much trouble, I'm going to go to this much trouble to read it the way he sent it to us. So,
Wow.
yeah, so that's how we met. And then she did the reading. You want me to keep going? And I can give
Sure,
you
sure.
just
Yeah.
a little bit of a timeline, and so you'll get a sense of it. And then she did the reading, and the reading was just phenomenal. I mean, she would tell you Dakota dropped in no uncertain terms and just blew our minds for a full hour. Um, and then and part of that was and this is one of the wild things. Like we didn't she didn't know I was a musician. She didn't know I was a guitar player. She didn't know I was a filmmaker. She knew none of that. And so but anyway, during the reading, Dakota said stuff like, she said, Dakota's saying his name and saying premiere. And then she's saying his name again and saying, my name's going to be in lights. And that made no sense at all to any of us at that time, you know.
Hmm.
So anyway, so he dropped in on her a couple more times and some really, really funny things because Dakota still has a very wicked sense of humor. So he was doing funny stuff a lot with Suzanne. And so anyway, he was so impressed. He was so impressive to her that she wanted to talk about him at the upcoming Helping Parents Heal conference, which was back in August a year ago. And but because of that, she needed pictures, and I would always send her, she'd say, send me this because you talked about this, send me this, send me this. And so we were doing back and forth for about maybe, I don't know, 2.5 months. And then finally one day, and then right before this happened, she went to see a psychic, and the psychic said there's going to be a movie made about your work within a year. And she was like, okay, I don't know how that's going to happen, but okay, cool. That sounds interesting. And then, so she and Ty were driving somewhere, and Ty was driving, and she was doing her stuff. And I just sent her something. And after months and months, she looked down in the left-hand corner of my signature and saw Zuzah Films. That's my film company with two amazing partners. And she was like, oh my God. She said at that point, she sort of knew that was a complete setup by spirit. That's how this is going to happen. And and then she asked me if I'd read Wolf's Message. I had not. And then when I read it, I couldn't tell whether it's funny. I couldn't tell whether she was asking me to direct her documentary or not. It was a vague sort of email she sent just saying, hey, the psychic said that this is going to happen, and I want you to read this book and tell me what you think. And I likened it to, if you're across the room and you see somebody waving to you and you wave back and they come towards you and then you realize they were waving to the guy behind you. There was a really good chance that I was going to embarrass myself, but we set up a call. And I said, I read your book. I'd love to talk. And so we set up this Zoom call, and I said, here's the way I see this thing opening up. And she said at that point she was sold. She knew because I already and I had to have already had a vision of how it could look, how it could feel, and really a beginning, a semi middle, and a definite ending. So
It's a
so that's how
beautiful.
that was a long story, but that's how it came.
No, it's a great story though, because again, things are meant to be, and spirit does
Oh
work
yeah.
in very unusual ways, and it's just
Yes.
a fascinating story. And so is Wolf's story,
Yes.
that is also incredibly, again, he knew when and how he was going to die. I,
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of really amazing and left clues,
Yes.
for that. And that's what's, so this movie is just beautiful. And visually, the music, I think you did the music. It's beautiful. It's like little pieces of it that it's so beautiful and so well told. Just you're right. It flows and 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 you're going like, wow, I can't believe that happened. I can't, just like your story about the book being upside down and backwards. I mean, and they never had that again with anybody else, apparently. So just that
No.
book, and it was, in your cart. So those
Yep.
are the things that are amazing about this, So go
Yes.
ahead, tell me a little bit more about about the filming of it.
Well, we I once we got approval, the other cool thing was we had a dear friend of Suzanne's who actually funded the entire movie, which is
Amazing.
amazing. And she can talk more to that at some other point. But that we had the funding, and that's a miracle in itself.
Right.
And so I gave them a budget, and we stuck to that budget hardcore the whole way through. But since I sort of knew who I needed to talk to, where we needed to shoot, and a general scope of the whole shebang, if you will, we knew that we needed to shoot in Darien, Georgia. That's where Mike and Beth Pasakarnis live. We shot Suzanne and Ty and Velvet, who's a wonderful character. We shot those segments up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I wanted to talk to a lot of Wolf's buddies, his dear friends, and we shot them in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And then we had some B-roll stuff to shoot down here in Atlanta. And so that was how that came to be. But for me, I thought, once I did figure out that, okay, maybe she is asking me to do this, I was like, I think I'm the right guy. Now, I'd never done a documentary before in my whole career. I've done thousands of commercials. I've done tons and tons and tons of corporate videos and a lot of comedy, a lot of serious stuff. I've done a lot of healthcare. I've done pretty much everything you can do except for a documentary. And so there was that little doubting voice in my brain, like, what do you know about doing a documentary? And but I also believed that I could bring a sense of empathy and sympathy to Mike and Beth because my wife and I, Dakota died. So we've dealt with that loss, and also, by the way, to Ty and Suzanne because they lost Susan. So for me, I felt like I gave that extra layer. I had no interest like the Hollywood guys in making it a movie and having a bad guy and good guy and all that sort of stuff because the story itself is so sensational. There's no reason to hype anything up. I mean, just
Mm-mm.
tell the thing and get out of the way, you know. And but I felt I could bring an understanding to Wolf, who obviously I never met him. He passed in 2010, but he struggled when he was on this earth, and our son Dakota struggled. I mean, there was Wolf was diagnosed schizophrenic. Dakota was not, but he had all sorts of learning issues, anxiety, depression, a whole laundry list of things that, as a parent, you hate to see your child live with and through. So I thought that I could bring that sense of loss and understanding of the loss because of our we didn't lose Dakota, but he transitioned. So I felt I could bring that to the party. And like I say, I felt I could bring an extra dose of sensitivity to Wolf and his struggles, his schizophrenia, his real inability for the most part to fit in. And I think that came through in spades as well. And the other commonality that I saw between Wolf and Dakota is one of my favorite parts of the movie is what his friends talk about why they loved him. I mean, that
Mhm.
was just such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And they used incredibly creative. So was Dakota. Incredibly kind. So was Dakota. Empathetic. Dakota. Wolf. I mean, they were peas in a pod in a lot of ways. And like even interviewing their friends, those friends reminded me a lot of Dakota's friends. So I think that helped in the storytelling. and the questions I asked and everything else. So
Yeah, you brought your compassion to the film for sure. When you were speaking, I was just visualizing Susan, who is Suzanne and Ty's, well, Suzanne's stepdaughter, but Ty's daughter, who also passed away by being hit by lightning. I mean, that's just the irony of it all. And then Wolf, obviously, who also died because he was struck by lightning. And then Dakota, and I was visualizing all three of them in heaven, just orchestrating all of this and dancing together, and joy about this film, about all of them, because your son's not in it, but he is in it in his own way. His spirit's in it. So it's just so beautiful. Just knowing that they're all there. But let's talk Dakota, the picture. I mean, we're not going to give anything really away, I don't think, by talking about the painting and the chair and the way the parents found the room. Do you want to talk a little bit, because that is just like truly amazing. I mean, there's no other
yeah,
word I can think of other than that.
yeah. It's for those that don't know the story. The quickest way to tell it is one of the biggest. Well, one big clue that he knew what was going to happen, uh, how he was going to pass, and when and where and everything was after he was struck and killed by lightning. Beth and Mike were not allowed to go to his apartment because at first all the police knew was there was a dead body at the base of a tree. Didn't know how this had happened, so that Mike and Beth could not go. They could not go into Wolf's apartment until they got clearance from the detectives. So, not knowing what else to do, they decided they went and found the tree where he had passed, and they knew that was the tree because when they took his body away, they had left his hat. Can you imagine? I mean, it blows my mind that there was
Mhm.
their son's hat showing them right where he had passed. They're both such brave people, Mike and Beth.
And
To
also, the other thing is, it was in Burial Hill. He was in a cemetery.
he was in a cemetery, and it's where he went to meditate. And he was, um, his last words that we know of were he was at a little cafe, a little coffee shop with his buddies. And at this point, there was no lightning, there was no nothing going on. And in the middle of a conversation, he stood up and said, "I have to go now." And those were his last words. Now, his soul knew he was going to die. And can you imagine what was going through his head and his heart as he's walking up to Burial Hill? And he went to where he would meditate, which was right at the base of that tree. And that's where the lightning struck and killed him.
And it was the
So,
only lightning. I mean, there was no other
yeah,
lightning.
there was one crack of thunder and one bolt of lightning, and that's what killed him.
And that
The
was it.
light That was it. And um, so um, getting back to his last painting and piece of art, um, piece of poetry, Mike and Beth found the tree and they wanted to do something, so they went and got a rose each and planted had the little spikes on it, so they spiked it into the ground. So right underneath, right beside, at the base of the tree of Wolf's, is now known as Wolf's tree, were two red roses. And so the next day, they got clearance from the detectives because the coroner said he did indeed pass by a lightning strike. You can come get his keys and you can go to the apartment. They go into his apartment, and his apartment I can describe is every inch of every wall, ceiling, inside the closets have Wolf's drawings and poetry or nature pictures all over it, and it's amazing. We're fortunate we have pictures and footage of it, and we use that in the film. But
Right.
anyway, so they go to his apartment, and Mike's in one room, Beth's walking around, and Beth says, "Mike, you got to come in here." And Mike goes in there, and um, Wolf's final piece of poetry and a piece of art is all one actual thing, was tacked to a wall, and there was a chair, hardback chair, sitting in the middle of the room, facing that final poem. And then his favorite T-shirt had a lightning bolt on it. He had been wearing that the day before when Mike was visiting, or 2 days before, and he had cut out the lightning bolt and pinned it on the other side, right behind the chair. And it was, Beth described it. She said it was like he had set up the room and said, "Here, read this, look at this." And that last piece of art and poetry talked about the light of nature freeing his soul. In other words, lightning. And his drawing had an eyeball, yin yang symbol in the middle. On the left, and we don't talk about it in the film, but was a medicine wheel, a Native American thing. And that's really about the oneness of everything. But on the right hand side was an old tree with two roses at the base. And he had done that the day before he died, or the day he died, and put it up and set it up in that room. And that was, uh, and I got to see that T-shirt when we shot at Mike and Beth's, and it was like it was almost like a sacred piece. I was afraid to touch it. It was
Mm.
just so. I was like, oh my God, that's this part of the story, and I got to hold and look at the artwork and the poetry, his final poem, and um, just amazing stuff. And that's probably enough. People need to go see the movie.
Yeah.
But that was one of the big clues that said, "Hey guys, I know what's going to happen. I know where it's going to happen, and I know what's going to happen right afterwards." So pretty
And
amazing.
it is amazing. And, we talked a little earlier about the duality, and you and I talked at the film festival that so many people, I think Wolf had a high IQ, Dakota had a high IQ, and I know other people who really struggle being on the earth plane when they have such a high IQ. They are in two different places, and they have a hard time having a foot here and a foot, in another plane, higher plane. And so I think, when they decide to pass on, it's a relief for them because they think they can do more work on the other side than they can. But Wolf's Message is very strong, and everyone, please seek out Wolf's Message. It really is just an incredibly beautiful film with an incredible message. And right now, more than ever, we need positivity and things that inspire us. And this film is definitely an inspiration. And the work that you did on it. And I do want to mention the song at the end that you wrote and sing at the end of it. And when I was listening to it last night, because I didn't know that the first time I watched the movie, so you sound like Leonard Cohen. It sounds like a Leonard
Oh
Cohen
wow.
song. It really did. That's what it reminded me
Thank
of.
you. I love Leonard Cohen, and
Me
and
too.
he's a little bit easier to listen to than Tom Waits. So I love Tom Waits as well, but but yeah, thank you so much. I've never heard the Leonard Cohen thing, but that's an honor. Thank you.
Oh,
And
you're very,
that's the song itself was a gift from Dakota. I mean, that whole thing just came flying down, and I grabbed whatever I could write on really quickly because I could tell this was coming. It was going to come fast, and it was the every lyric, even a chord structure, all the way down to sort of a tempo was there from the get go. And I think when I recorded it, I changed one line, and that was it.
wow. It's
It was
beautiful. It's a beautiful song, and it's a beautiful way to end the film. Unfortunately, our time is up. Where can people see Wolf's Message?
To watch Wolf's Message, you can do it two ways. You can do it live and in person with Suzanne. If you go to wolfsmessage.com, you can see where she and Ty are right now on any given day. Not sure when this will air, but
They're
there's
traveling all over the country, so with the
they're,
film,
yeah,
right?
and they're doing 30 stops,
Wow.
and right now they're somewhere near Denver. But by
Okay.
the time this airs, I don't know where they'll be. But go to wolfsmessage.com and you can see where they are to watch it live. And when you watch it live, you have this wonderful experience with Suzanne telling some of the stories that I told, only better. And then or you can just click on the watch now icon, and it's a pay-per-view sort of situation, and it's very inexpensive, and the money goes to a great cause, and that's how you can see it right now. Oh, and it's being picked up by Gaia TV as well.
Great. Gaia TV. Well, thank you, Jim. Make sure we put that in our social media posting. We'll put those in there. So thank you so much. It's an honor having you on the show.
Oh,
And
thank you,
it's a
Jen.
beautiful film. And everybody, Wolf's Message, you really, really, really need to see this film. You definitely do. So have a wonderful day, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.